Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. So it's been a little while, I'm slightly late bringing you this is going to be my January wrap up. So I started my new job in January and it was very full on, it is very full on, and I had a couple of weeks where I was away with work and that was very tiring, and then I picked up a cold which you may be able to still hear. I'm a little bit snuffly and a little bit bunged up still. So I've not been able to film for a couple of weeks, which is why there's been a couple of weeks with no videos coming from me, which I'm very sorry about because I've really missed doing it, but I just didn't feel up to filming the last couple of weekends. So I'm filming quite a bit today and hopefully get back onto track with my filming schedule and uploading schedule. As I mentioned, this is going to be my January wrap up. I know it's a bit late, but hopefully you won't mind that anyway. So I finished a total of 5 books in January. I did also have one book that I decided not to carry on reading. I'll explain that why in a bit. I also have been reading a couple of books that are in omnibus edition, so those are still ongoing. So I'll explain about them when I get to them. Of the 5 books I read, 4 were ones that I already owned and 1 was one that I borrowed from the library. I read 1 non-fiction book and 1 book of short stories. And for the challenges that I've set myself for this year, I read 1 book towards my Read Around the World challenge, 1 book towards my indie challenge, and 1 of the books was from the oldest books on my TBR. In terms of rating, I gave 2 books 3 stars, 2 books 4 stars, and 1 book 5 stars. I was also taking part in the Tome Infinity readathon, and I managed to complete 3 tiers of that challenge. Each tier had sort of certain subjects that you were trying to cover in your reading. So in the whole month I managed to complete the 3rd tier, and as I go through the books I'll tell you which challenges, tasks they met for that, and also the book that I read for the indie challenge I'll tell you which categories I ticked off for the indie challenge as well. I'm going to start with the book that I did not finish, which was the first book that I tried to read this year. So my reading year hasn't got off to the best start. It did get better later on in the month, but 5 is not a great number of books. And part of that was that I sort of started the year in a bit of a reading slump because of the push to finish 100 books last year. And then the first book that I picked up this year I really struggled to get into, and that was Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. It is one that I do intend to pick up again in the future, so there are various reasons I decided not to finish it. At this point I got about maybe 50 pages into it and I was just really struggling to get into it. I enjoyed the writing style. I know some people don't like the footnotes, but I really quite like that. I liked the narrative voice. My issue was that the the central storyline of the book was about a female assassin on it was a revenge plot basically with a female assassin, and that was too similar to the last book that I read last year, which was Emily Nation, which I really hadn't enjoyed, and it was just too soon to read another book with that topic character combination. And also it was a library book and I'd had it out for a while and it needed to go back. I didn't want to renew it. I wasn't enjoying it enough that I wanted to carry on reading it at that point. So I do think it is one I'll read at some point in the future, but I'm not in any rush to get to it. I think I'd rather finish off the Illuminae Files, which is by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, and sort of tie a bow around that series and finish that one off before I get into another series by him. And I know that the 3rd instalment of the Nevernight trilogy, I think the final one, is out this year, so maybe once they're all out I'll then pick them all up. So the first book that I actually finished was also, I was still in a reading slump when I was reading this, and I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. This was Tentacle by Rita, Indiana. This is a very short book and it took me a really long time to read it. I found it quite hard work. It isn't like nothing I've ever read before. Let's put it that way. So this achieved a lot of things for me though. So I read this for the indie challenge. This is a book I actually received in my And Other Stories subscription. So And Other Stories is an independent publisher that often publish translated literature that wouldn't usually be translated into English, so this is an example of that. The author is from the Dominican Republic, so that was another country for my Read Around the World that I got to tick off for the Caribbean. I also ticked off a lot of challenges for the indie challenge of this on the bingo card, so while I'm aiming to read at least 1 book per square, for the indie challenge. This one, it ticked off 7 squares. So I ticked off an author from another country, translated book, marginalised people as the main character is trans, out of your comfort zone because it was very weird, a book that defies genre, so it's kind of science fiction but also quite speculative, and there's a little bit of historical fiction in there because there are some pirates. I mean, basically the main character is kind of a time traveller, but the way he time travels is by duplicating his body in different time periods. It's strange, it's bizarre, anyway, so it kind of is science fiction, but it doesn't really explain how any of this stuff works, and it's linked to the Dominican sort of voodoo religion. Sorry if I've got that wrong. So it's kind of quite fantastical, magical realism, speculative. Yeah, it also ticked off the square for LGBTQIA because, as I mentioned, the main character is trans, and it was also a book from my TBR. So ticked off 7 challenges for the indie challenge for that. For Tome Infinity, this also ticked off all of the challenges for the first tier, basic survival. So it covered air, water, fire, food, sleep and shelter. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about really. It was interesting. It's different. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars, so it engaged me enough that I wanted to keep reading it, and it was only quite short anyway. And yeah, there are some graphic scenes, there's some scenes of, I don't know how to describe it, it's not quite rape, but sexual violence, I guess, is how you'd term it. So if you're sensitive to that, maybe avoid this book. There's some drug use in there. The main character, Alchilde, I think is how you say it, at the beginning of the book she is biologically female but undergoes a procedure during the book to become male, and the scene where that happens, it's a drug that has been developed in the time period that the book is set in the future, and that sort of was quite a difficult scene to read as well. Yeah, there's a lot in there in such a short book, and I didn't love it, but if you like weird science fiction, maybe you will. So I do recommend it if you want to read something that's very different and maybe probably out of your comfort zone, maybe give this one a try. I don't know what else to say about it, and I've rambled on long enough, and I don't want this to be a really long video when I'm only talking about 5 books. So the next book that I gave 3 stars to was Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Jules Verne. I read this during the 24 and 48 readathon. It was one of the oldest books on my TBR. I've had it for a long time and haven't read it. I quite enjoyed it. Again, it's science fiction, but sort of old school science fiction, and it's to do with travelling to the centre of the earth. They don't actually get there, which I found a little bit disappointing, and it was quite interesting to read because it was first published in 1864, so it was very interesting to read with all the advances in science since then that made the story slightly less realistic, and I suppose that's a danger with old school science fiction. I did enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. I would probably read more by Jules Verne. I think I have another one of his books which might actually be in French. Yeah, it was alright. I liked the main character. I didn't like his uncle. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. It was alright. And so this, by the time I was reading this, I was on to tier 3 of Tome Infinity, so maybe I should have gone through books in the order I read them this month because that would have made more sense, but never mind. So this book covered for tier 3 technology, I can't read my notes, higher education because the author is French and I studied French at university. Sorry, maybe you should have read it in French for it to count for that, but never mind. And urban settlements because it covers, like, the first part is set in a town and he goes to a couple of different towns, so yeah, I included it for that. So anyway, that was Journey to the Centre of the Earth. So the first book I gave 4 stars to this month was Lion by Saroo Brierley. This was originally published as A Long Way Home. This is a true story. It's a memoir based on Saroo's experiences of his life. So he was born in India and was separated from his family at a young age and ended up in an orphanage from where he was adopted by an Australian family. And then when he grew up, he started trying to look for his birth family. I filmed a review of this, which I'll link below. It does contain some spoilers. It's a comparison between the book and the film. The film was one of my favourite films of 2017, so as soon as I found out that there was a book based on it, I really wanted to read it. The film was beautiful. The book is really lovely, really well written, gives a deeper insight into all of the events. Definitely worth a read. I gave this 4 stars, and I used this to complete all the challenges for tier 2 of Tome Infinity. So that was medicine, education, trading, procreation, oral communication and travel, which was the small settlements tier. Yeah, really highly recommend this one if you are interested in memoirs, autobiographies, adoption, world travel, India or Australia, then you will probably enjoy this book. Next, I'm going to talk about a couple of reads for Mission Marple. So one of these I counted as a completed book. The other one, The Murder at the Vicarage, is part of an omnibus edition, so I haven't counted this as a completed book because I've only read one of the stories in this edition. The Murder at the Vicarage is the first in the Miss Marple book series. I really enjoyed it. If it was an individual book, I would have given it 4 stars. At some point I do want to get all of these books as individual books because it is really annoying having omnibus editions, particularly when they're not in the correct order, but never mind. I love this as an introduction to Miss Marple. I had read one Marple book before, but I'm really enjoying them now, reading them in order. I loved all the small village politics, or the intrigue of everyone knowing everyone else and how that all sort of fits together and how suspicion flies around. I really loved the vicar as a narrator and his family, and yeah, it's just really a delight. I'm really growing to love Agatha Christie. I've got such a new appreciation for her. I kind of dismissed her as being a bit cosy mystery in the past, but actually there's so much more depth to her books that I'm now realising, and once I've finished reading all the Marple ones, I do want to read all the Poirot ones in order as well, so I'll be getting onto that. So that was The Murder at the Vicarage. I also read for Mission Marple this month. I should say Mission Marple is hosted by Mara from Books Like Woe, and I'll link her Marple playlist down below. So I also finished for January The 13 Problems. This was a collection of short stories. The setup is the first 6 take place at an evening at Miss Marple's house, where each person present tells a mystery story and the rest of the group try and work out the solution, and without fail every time Miss Marple gets the correct solution. And then that continues on. The next 6 stories are at a dinner party that Miss Marple is invited to, and the same thing happens, and surprise surprise, Miss Marple solves all of the stories. But actually, to the other members of the group in both situations, they are quite surprised that Miss Marple has figured all these stories out. And then the final story, the 13th one, takes place a little while afterwards, where there's been a death in the village. It appears to have been a suicide, but Miss Marple suspects murder, and so she contacts Sir Henry Clithering, who has been present at the previous 2 evenings, and says to him, I think this person was murdered and this is the murderer, and asks him can he investigate, and it turns out again that she is correct. So as a setup for the rest of the Marple series, I think this is really helpful as an insight into her character. I really enjoyed some of the stories in particular. There was one that really helped me with an activity we did on training at work to do with how we understand things. Basically, it was a nursery rhyme rewritten in really complicated language, and I figured it out because of a story in here. The point that was trying to make was the way we can explain things isn't always accessible to the people that are listening to us. That was the point of the story as well. Anyway, so I gave this collection 4 stars. In the 3rd tier of Tome Infinity, the Growing Civilization tier, I use this to tick off class structures, because I mean some of the people are a bit snobby in here. Miss Marple included, actually, which was a surprise to me. And then the final book that I read in January was Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 2nd book in the Grisha trilogy. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed it actually even more than Shadow and Bone. I think just because of the development of the characters, particularly Alina's character. I loved some of the new characters, so Prince Nikolai and Tolia and Tamar, the bodyguards. the twins. They were some really great additions to the book and really brought it up to another level for me from what Shadow and Bone had been. So I'm going to try and get out Ruin and Rising from the library soon because I really want to read that, and then move on to the rest of the Grishaverse, because I've heard that the later duologies get even better. So yeah, I gave this 5 stars. As I say, I enjoyed Shadow and Bone, but this one was even better to me, and I'm really excited to carry on with this trilogy. And this one I used to tick off Government in the Tome Infinity Tier 3. So that was all the books I read in January. Usually I do a little bit at the end about what I'm currently reading and what I'm planning to read next. I'm actually going to do that in a separate video this time around, because I have been overly ambitious in what I'm trying to achieve in February and have signed up to a load of readathons and things. So I'm going to do another video about that, going through what the different readathons are and what I'm hoping to achieve for them. So that is it for this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, and have a chat to me down in the comments with what you thought. How much did you read in January? Did you do better than me? Because I didn't do very well. You can follow me on my social media. That information will always be in the description box below. Please like this video if you liked it. Please think about subscribing if you haven't, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!